All right. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulihi al-Kareem. Wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam tasliman kathira. So this class is sort of a follow-up to the four Imams class. And essentially what we're going to do is we're going to see how we address the entire topic of hadith and madhabs and fiqh and how we navigate through it. Because as I left you guys off, you guys were Hanabila, right? I left you guys off. Okay, good. So some of you are still holding strong, right, to your madhabs. The idea, though, is that there's a lot of confusion. I think this is probably the number one most asked question is, do we have to follow a madhab or not? How do we approach an authentic hadith in the presence of a madhab that we grew up with? What is our role? At what point do I have, am I allowed to use my reasoning? At what point am I allowed to compare evidences? Is it when I know a little bit of Arabic? Is it when I've read fiqh as-sunnah and I've read a basic comparative fiqh? At what point can I compare, and so on and so forth? And subhanAllah, interestingly enough, what I found is that all you really have are 4 or 5 minute YouTube answers. There really isn't much of a scholarly analysis of this topic in the English language, at least. And so I wanted to actually go through a thorough examination of that. Inshallah ta'ala, we have an hour today. I don't know if I'll finish it all in an hour. We'll see, but we'll give it a shot, inshallah ta'ala. But essentially, as we compared all of these madhabs, we said that there's a work by Shah Waliullah Dihlawi, which is called Hujjatullah al-Baligha. And essentially, Shah Waliullah, he talks about the comparisons or how similar these madhabs really were to each other. He said that Imam Ahmad to Imam al-Shafi'i is like an Imam al-Shaybani to Imam Abu Hanifa, for example. All right? In the sense that he took the madhab of a Shafi'i, but he never really departed from the core principles of a Shafi'i, but he simply placed more emphasis on hadith, which is essentially what an Imam al-Shaybani did with Imam Abu Hanifa, and so on and so forth. So these madhabs, because of the frequent interaction amongst the Imams, they really are one madhab in and of themselves, and there are very few differences between them, in a way. And that's why Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, without any disagreement, includes these four madhabs. All four of these madhabs are part of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah. The difference of opinion is, am I allowed to be outside of strictly following one of these four madhabs and still fall within Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah? So for example, if I chose to follow the Zahiri madhab, am I still from Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah? Because the Zahiri approach is the literalist approach. Now Ibn Hazm al-Andalusi, rahimahullah ta'ala, Imam Ibn Hazm, who was the star of the Zahiri madhab, the founder of the Zahiri madhab, Dawood al-Zahiri, is not really that known. Ibn Hazm is the Zahiri madhab, basically, because of his prominence within that school. Is he included amongst Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah? Of course he is. Okay, so is the Zahiri approach a valid approach within Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah? The answer is yes, because Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah is united by its creed. Okay? Fiqh is not what makes a person from Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Their creed is. So the four schools of thought are included, and when it comes to the Zahiri approach, they are still loosely included in Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah. The fiqh of the Zahiris is definitely not orthodox, but they're still included within Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Okay? Because there is no denial of the Quran and the Sunnah there, it's just an odd interpretation of the Sunnah. Okay? So anyway, how do we approach this all? Number one, if you guys noticed, we said that the first two schools that really existed before these four schools were two approaches. What were they called? Ahlul Hadith wa Ahlul Ra'i. There were the people of Hadith and there were the people of reasoning. Both of them accepted Hadith, as we said. However, what they did with the Hadith and what they did in when there was no Hadith presence, and the conditions that they placed upon the acceptance of a hadith for fiqhi purposes, that's where the difference falls. Okay, how much you can use your reasoning, and really the deeper issue there is the role of the aql versus the role of the naql, the role of the intellect versus the role of the text. Okay, now Rasulullah ﷺ, he says in a hadith, so we'll start off with that, because the debate starts off with the role of aql versus the role of naql. Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah all agree that it is impermissible to use the aql in the presence of naql. It's impermissible to use the intellect in the presence of text. What that means is that if a text is explicit in its meaning and in its understanding. You know, there's some things that can be ambiguous. The text can be ambiguous, so you have to apply your reasoning to the text. And we'll talk about that, how one text can be interpreted in multiple different ways. Then there's permission to use the aql there, and that's where the scholars disagree. However, when there's a clear text, which is apparent, not only in its wording, but apparent in its meaning, then we accept an-naql, we accept the text. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, نَحْنُ أُمَّةٌ أُمِّيَّةٌ لَا نَكْتُبُ وَلَا نَحْسَبُ. Prophet ﷺ said that we are an illiterate ummah. We don't calculate and we don't write. Now, of course, the Prophet ﷺ said that hadith in the context of the determining of the months in Islam. So he said, الشهر هكذا وهكذا. That the month is either 29 days, so he did 29 figures, or 30 days. So the Prophet ﷺ was referring to the simplicity of this ummah, or of the text that's been given to us. Now what that means is, as the scholars say, that the religion is profound enough to where it could busy a Harvard professor for the rest of his life, but it's simple enough to where a Bedouin in a desert could properly understand it and receive it. Okay? The religion applies to everyone, meaning it's not a theology that's untouched by the masses, in the sense that it's not like we have a hierarchy in our religion to the point that the average Muslim has nothing to do with the religion. He simply just does what he's told. Right? There is a role to play for every single Muslim in the understanding of the religion and in the implementation of the religion. It applies to everyone, and it can appeal to each and every single person. It's not something, you know, La ilaha illallah is a very simple concept. It's not something that can only appeal to a professor. A Bedouin in the desert can understand why there's no God but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All right? So there's the importance of using using our intellect, and it appeals to each and every single person. We said, Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala, when he was debating with a Christian, mentioning how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in almost every surah in the Quran the use of the intellect. أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ أَفَلَا تَتَفَكَّرُونَ أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ. In different capacities, don't they think, don't they contemplate, don't they reflect? And that notion is very profound, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just commands you to reflect. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not hold you accountable if you are unable to think at the level of another person. With what's been given to you, use what's been given to you to understand it properly. And usually when it comes to this entire discussion of logic, the use of logic and reasoning over the use of the text, one of the main issues that we have is that most people jump to the maqasid, they jump to the objectives of the religion, the objectives of sharia, the objectives of fiqh, and so on and so forth, and they don't understand the usul, they don't understand the foundations, they don't understand the principles of deriving legislation in this religion. So you have a person that uses his logic to reject a hadith without understanding the science of hadith and the science of acceptance or rejection of a hadith. You have a person that says that the Quran doesn't really say this without understanding the Arabic language. You have a person that says that, you know, logically speaking, we can derive this understanding, but they've never studied the principles of how to derive rulings in the first place. So this is a problem that we have now as well, that people jump to the maqasid, you know, philosophers and so on and so forth, they jump to the objectives piece without understanding the wasa'il, without understanding the means. Okay, the way that rulings were derived in the first place by our great scholars. And, you know, so you have a person who's very ignorant about the religion, might be very knowledgeable in other pieces and other aspects of life, and they bring that, you know, that overall smartness, if you will, that they have, and they bring it to the religion, and they start reasoning their way through the religion. And that's a major problem. So just bringing it back to the fact that we need text, and that the text solves many problems. The very famous example of Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu ta'ala anhu, that if the religion was just by reasoning, then when we did masah over our socks, when we wiped over our socks, we would wipe the bottom of our feet, not the top of our feet. Because the bottom of your feet is what gets dirty. So if this religion was about reasoning, only about reasoning and neglecting the text, then we'd wash the bottom of our feet, not wipe the top of our feet. Aisha radiallahu anha, she also said, in regards to a woman making up her days of fasting, she said radiallahu ta'ala anha, that if the religion was about reasoning, then we would make up our salah, not our fasting, on the days that we miss. Okay? Because salah is more important than siyam, more important than fasting. But by consensus of the scholars, when a woman becomes pure, she makes up her fasting, she doesn't have to make up her prayers. And Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala, he was asked about the difference between al-mani wal-bawl, the difference between sperm and urine. And he said that you don't do ghusl after you urinate, but urine is what's najas. Okay, whereas, al-mani is not necessarily najas, especially not in the Shafi'i madhab, it's not considered najas. Okay, so the fact that, again, we look to the text first and foremost, and we understand that the text takes precedence over our own, reasoning through faith and deriving our own rulings and deriving our own philosophies. And then we go to the scholars, we go to the teachers. And it's extremely important to know when you're reading a scholar, when you're reading what a scholar has wrote, or when you're reading the fiqh of a scholar, you need to know their time, you need to know their place, you need to know their angle, you need to know their context, you need to know a lot of things. You need to know at what point of their lives they wrote what they wrote, at what point they gave the fatwa that they gave, what the circumstances of that author were, of that scholar were. So for example, traditionally speaking, if a scholar wrote in prison, all right, his writing in prison tended to be a lot more pessimistic. Whereas a scholar that was Qadi al-Qudat, the head judge of state and so on and so forth, tended to write in a more optimistic tone. All right, and you need to understand those things. Also, a scholar that wrote in the time of the Crusades, or wrote in the time of the Tatar, the Mongols, is going to write differently than a scholar that wrote, in a Dawla al-Uthmaniyya, in the prime of the Ottoman Empire. Right? Everyone is going to have their approach, and just because they're human beings, they're going to be affected by their circumstances, in their fiqh, in their approach to history, in their approach to the way forward for Muslims, and so on and so forth. Even sometimes the same scholar, as his circumstances change, you'll see that his opinions will change dramatically. Right? You can almost trace by the tone, if you know the history of certain scholars, at what point in their lives they wrote this, based on the tone of the way that they wrote certain things. And we said the fatawa. Okay, the circumstances change the fatawa. So Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala changing over 60 of 80 fatwas when he moved from Iraq to Egypt. All right, over 60 of 80 changed. Now, seriously, the difference between Egypt back then and Iraq back then is a far less difference than the difference between the United States of America now and Saudi Arabia or Egypt now. If al-Shafi'i changed over 60 fatwas coming from Iraq to Egypt at that time, then what do you think al-Shafi'i would do if he lived in the US or lived in Saudi Arabia or lived in the UAE or Malaysia or wherever it may be in this time? How many fatwas do you think he would change? So it's important to understand that as well. It's not a one-size-fits-all thing. Okay? And this, by the way, even when we talk about aqa'id, even when we talk about theology, this is also something to keep in mind. If you said the Sufis, al-Mutasawwifa, the Sufis in every century tends to mean something different. SubhanAllah, when you read Islamic history, if you see that one scholar is praising as-Sufiyya, whereas another scholar is attacking them, it depends on what the Sufis were doing at that time. And to just go ahead and take these quotations and cut and paste and say, Imam Malik said this about the Sufis, and then Ibn Hajar said this about the Sufis. Ibn Hajar, smacked them down, and then Al-Qurtubi went and praised them, right? It's not that their opinions were different on Ahl al-Tasawwuf, the people of Tasawwuf. It's that the people of Tasawwuf had, different practices in accordance with different times. So there were times when Tasawwuf was praiseworthy and times when Tasawwuf was not praiseworthy, even to people that were considered Sufis themselves. So for example, even when you're reading about groups and things of that sort, or what Imam Ahmad rahimahullah means when he talks about mujalasatu ahl al-bid'ah, sitting with the people of innovation. Right? So you have all these quotes, for example, that get cut and pasted and they say that, sitting with the people of innovation is haram. What did Imam Ahmad mean when he said Ahlul Bid'ah? Was he talking about the guy that disagrees with you on Mawlid? Or was he talking about people that say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't speak? Or people that would have major innovations in their religion? Because that's also part of the lugha of Ahlul Ilm, understanding the language of the people of knowledge. Was it bid'ah mukaffira he was talking about, or bid'ah ghayr mukaffira? When he said Ahlul Bid'ah, was he talking about people of innovation that had innovations that took them out of belief, or innovations that allowed them to remain believers? Because there's some innovations that don't make you a disbeliever. They're still innovations, but they're more minor innovations. And there are some innovations that make you a disbeliever. So it's irresponsible to go and take some of the opinions of these Imams and say, Imam Ahmad said this, not understanding what Imam Ahmad rahimahullah was talking about. The context Imam Ahmad was referring to. So many of the statements, for example, of Ahl al-Bid'ah, are particularly cut out of the books of al-Hanabila, where Imam Ahmad was responding to people in regards to how they deal with al-Jahmiyyah. And then people take them now, and they throw those statements at each other within the groups of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Whereas Imam Ahmad rahimahullah wasn't talking about groups that are even loosely associated with Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. You see the problem here when we start cutting and copying and we neglect the context even of the terms that were used, the schools that what they meant back then, and so on and so forth. And then obviously books of fiqh written in times of political turmoil where there was deep madhabism. All right, where there was ta'assub, where there were fights going on between the madhabs. So to read books of fiqh in the 11th century, almost every Hanafi and Shafi'i text that was written in the 11th century is deeply skewed because they were at war with each other. In the sense they were writing nasty, terrible things about each other. So to take an opinion that a Hanafi said about a Shafi'i back then, or vice versa, and then to apply it to our context also becomes very, very, very dangerous. Also then understanding whether a person is a muhaddith or a faqih. Now, when it comes to the difference between al-muhaddithin wal-fuqaha, if you remember Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala, when he asked al-Sha'bi what he should do, al-Sha'bi told him what each scholar does basically. If you become a scholar of tafsir, you'll do this. If you become a scholar of hadith, you'll do this. If you become this and this and that, then you'll do this. The muhaddithin and the fuqaha had very different personalities. All right? A muhaddith in his nature, the way that a muhaddith is made, is to be very, very, very stern. Almost every muhaddith you study in history was kind of mean. All right? Whether it's al-A'mash or whether, even when you talk about the contemporary scholars of hadith, seriously, they were very staunch, meaning they just had this certain level of, nothing is really going to move them. And Allah created them that way because they had to, class their fathers as da'if. Ali ibn al-Madini said, La yuqbal hadith abi, the Shaykh of al-Bukhari and the Shaykh of Ahmad, he said that my father's ahadith are da'if. Abu Dawood classed his son as da'if in hadith. Abu Bakr ibn Abi Shayba, he said, Abi da'if jiddan, meaning his father is a fabricator of hadith. People of hadith had to have a certain staunch, they just had to have this personality where nothing really moved them. And subhanAllah, it was a mercy. Like you read about Al-A'mash, was one of the greatest hadith scholars of all time. The guy was just plain mean. Rahimahullah, but he was mean to his students. Like nothing really moved him. And it was a mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that these people were like that. Why? Because, if I warmed up to you and I thought that you were really sweet, that doesn't mean I'm going to start accepting your hadith. I still have to be true to the science that's been given to me. So when you read traditionally writings from people that were considered muhaddithin, they tend to be more harsh. And that's not a bad thing per se. All right? They also, al-muhaddithin, tend to be very literalist in their fiqh. The way that a person of hadith interprets fiqh is usually in a very zahiri way, a very literalist way. And you have to keep that in mind when you're reading a text that's been written by someone that was a muhaddith, that was commenting on a fiqhi issue but wasn't necessarily a scholar in fiqh. Okay? Now one of the accusations against Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala is that he was a muhaddith, he wasn't a faqih. But as we said, the scholars of his time considered him a great faqih. Al-Shafi'i considered him a master in fiqh. So there's no way to really make that claim. The people of fiqh, on the other hand, were a lot kinder with the people. They were a lot softer. They interacted with the people more often. They felt the pain of the people. They tried to understand what the people were going through. And that's what made them who they were. All right, so the muhaddithin were in their circles and in their own little worlds. The people of fiqh were taking the prescriptions from the muhaddithin, and they were, basically using those ahadith and deciding how to apply them to the situations that they were in. Also, as we see in Islamic history, extremes produced other extremes. Extremes produced other extremes. When Shi'ism, went very far, when there were some groups that became very extreme, when it went from political tashayyu' to theological tashayyu', then you had the opposite extreme, which was an-nawasib, people that actually became abusive towards Ahl al-Bayt, people that actually disregarded the family of the Prophet ﷺ, people that, so you had some that sanctified and some that cursed, right? So you have a Shafi'i, as we said, who was called to treason on the basis that he was supposedly a Shi'i. You had Imam al-Nasa'i, rahimahullah ta'ala, one of the greatest muhaddithin, one of the authors of the 6 books of hadith, who was killed by a nawasib, people that went to the extreme of hating Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu, hating the people of the household, and they actually killed him. He was a great Sunni scholar because they said that he was too friendly to Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu and his descendants. Alright, so it's important to not get lost in all of those things without properly understanding. This is what I'm saying is the danger of a person who really doesn't understand history, doesn't understand usul al-fiqh, doesn't understand fiqh, doesn't understand maqasid, doesn't understand the difference between a muhaddith and a faqih, doesn't understand political circumstances, to just pick up a book and start deriving their own conclusions. This is the only reason I'm pointing this all out, is for that very reason. It's not practical to do so. Also, we said that lughat al-fiqh, the language of fiqh, in every madhab, there's different terminology, right? So a shaykh, if you're reading a Hanbali book, and you see a shaykh written, it's referring to Ibn Qudama rahimahullah ta'ala. If you see a shaykhan in the Hanbali madhab, as the Hanafi madhab, who are the 2 shaykhs? Abu Yusuf and al-Shaybani. But if you say the 2 shaykhs in the Hanbali madhab, you mean Ibn Qudama and you mean Majd al-Din ibn Taymiyyah, the grandfather of Taqiyuddin. If you're reading in a book and you see as-Salaf, alright, the pious predecessors, in each book of fiqh that means something different depending on the madhab of the writer. Okay? If you see al-Qadi, in the Hanafi madhab it means Abu Yusuf, in the Hanbali madhab it means Abu Ya'la. Okay? And there are different terminologies, subhanAllah. I mean, we learned that we had to actually memorize all the terminologies within the Hanbali books, because when we studied usul from a Hanbali perspective, I'm telling you, it was the most confusing thing in the world. And it made me angry because I was reading my first books, the Muqaddimah by Bakr ibn Abi Zayd, rahimahullah ta'ala, Al-Madkhal ila Madhab al-Imam Ahmad, and he's saying words like Al-Munaqqih. And I'm like, who is Al-Munaqqih? Who is Al-Sharih? Who's the one that's doing the explaining here? I'll just say the explainer. And you've got to go dig through Hanbali books to see who is Al-Sharih. And then it's Imam al-Mardawi, rahimahullah ta'ala. Or when he says Al-Fatawa. Okay, Ruya fil Fatawa. It was written in Al-Fatawa. Which Fatawa are you talking about? Are you talking about Masail Ahmad from Salih, from Abdullah? And it turned out that it was the Fatawa of Ibn Taymiyyah, for example. Right? When they say Al-Fatawa, they just mean Ibn Taymiyyah. His fatwa, these types of things. You have to know who you're reading, what you're reading. So it is absolutely impossible to read these books without a teacher. It's absolutely impossible to understand these things without a teacher and just dive right into it. And of course, there's a very famous statement, "Man kana kitabahu shaykhu fahuwa jahil." Whoever takes a book as his shaykh is an ignorant person. And it's not an absolute statement, because there are some people in history that were able to learn deeply through reading and so on and so forth, and didn't have too much interaction with teachers and so on and so forth. But it becomes very troublesome. And Imam al-Dhahabi rahimahullah ta'ala, after he quotes a statement, he mentions Thomas the physician. He gives all these examples of people that ruined their lives because they didn't have teachers. So he said that this isn't even just true with Ahlul Ilm, with the people of knowledge. He said it's true in every science. And so he mentioned Thomas the physician, a very famous doctor. And his name was Ibn Ridwan as well. Usually you see that Ibn Sina and Ibn Rushd and so on and so forth, they have their Greek names and so on and so forth, and then they have their Arabic names. So he starts to give his example. He says that this man was considered a brilliant doctor, but he didn't have and he used the word, he didn't have a sheikh in medicine basically. He learned it all himself. And he said, as a result of that, he read about Habbat al-Sawda, the black seed. And when he read it, he thought that it said Hayyat al-Sawda, the black snake, which is the literal translation, the black mamba, right? It's not Kobe Bryant. Kobe Bryant can't harm anybody, all right? But the black mamba, okay? He read Habbat al-Sawda as Hayyat al-Sawda, okay? And so he went and he actually tried to find one of them. And he actually got bit by it and he died, all right? So he said that that's the problem when you don't have a sheikh that's teaching you. Even as a doctor, you'll ruin yourself. Right? Imagine if you had to learn medicine without a professor. Okay, so one extreme, and I'm going to get to the madhab now and how we study the ahadith. One extreme is to say no normal person should read ahadith. You shouldn't even read ahadith. Al-Bukhari is meant only for the ulama. Don't even pick up a copy of Al-Bukhari. Muslim is meant only for the scholars. Don't even pick up a book of Sahih Muslim. Just leave it all alone. That's an extreme. Why? Because there's a lot of good that can be attained, in regards to virtues of certain acts, in regards to al-iman, al-wahi, in regards to, the overwhelming principles of this religion through reading these books of hadith. However, it's also an extreme to say that you read Bukhari and Muslim and so on and so forth by yourself and you start deriving your own rulings. That's also a very dangerous extreme, because then you lose context. And subhanAllah, Ibn Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he actually narrated a hadith from the Prophet ﷺ, where the Prophet ﷺ said that the thing he feared most for the ummah is a person who reads the Quran and takes it out of context and starts to apply ayat that were meant for not only non-Muslims but the enemies of the Prophet ﷺ to Muslims, for example. And that's what the Khawarij do, right? They'll take these ayat that were revealed about this, Abu Jahl and Uqba bin Abi Mu'ayt and these people, and then they'll go and apply it to a Muslim, right? So Rasulullah ﷺ actually feared, more than anything else, a person reading the Quran out of context. So if even the Quran can be read out of context, what about the ahadith of the Prophet ﷺ and the sayings of the ulama who are not as careful as divine revelation can be? If even divine revelation in its wording and meaning can be taken out of context and can be used for a dangerous purpose, then what about studying hadith? And so there are multiple ahadith that come in regards to this. So for example, the hadith of the 72 sects. The Prophet ﷺ mentioned the ummah dividing into 72 sects. Okay, well, are the sects, first of all, is when the Prophet ﷺ says 72 sects, is the Prophet ﷺ literally saying 72? Or is as-sab'een في اللغة العربية الكثرة تعني الكثرة, right? Does it mean abundance? Does 72 mean abundance? Did the Prophet ﷺ really mean 72? Or did the Prophet ﷺ simply mean there is an abundance of sects? Okay, are all of these sects non-Muslims or are they Muslims? Does that mean that there's only one sect of Islam that's Muslim and that they're all non-Muslims? Or does that mean they are misguided in certain ways, but they're still part of the ummah? Because the Prophet ﷺ says that my ummah will divide into 72 sects. So does that mean that we start to say anyone that's not upon this truth, the way that we understand it to be the truth, is in hellfire eternally, is a non-Muslim? How do we understand all these things? It's extremely dangerous for a person to just go and read it. Also, in understanding some of the very subtle meanings, and this is something I think you guys as students of Arabic can appreciate, how one bi versus li can change the entire meaning. So for example, in the discussion of al-bid'ah, innovation, what constitutes al-bid'ah? When the Prophet ﷺ says, "Man ahdatha fi amrina hadha ma laysa minhu fahuwa rad." Whoever innovates into this affair of ours, that which is not in it, will have it rejected. Now if I was to say, "Man ahdatha li amrina hadha ma laysa minhu," does it change the meaning or not? Dramatically. Okay, in fact, that Imam al-Qarafi rahimahullah ta'ala, he said, "Man ahdatha fi amrina" is bid'ah. "Man ahdatha li amrina" is sunnah. Okay, which means to find ways. If you change the fi amrina means if you innovate within the religion itself. Li amrina means to use things to spread and establish sunnah, is sunnah in and of itself. Remember we talked about fath al-dhara'i', opening the ways to a sunnah. So for example, the use of the microphone, okay, so that the people can hear someone in the salah, right? Now, Allahu Alam, now it could become bid'ah, for example, if you start changing the microphone, and because you know where technology is going, right? So no matter how you read into it, somehow it's going to make you sound like Sheikh Mar al-Mu'aykili, or it's going to make you sound like Husari. Allahu Alam where it's going, right? This idea of using the mic and the sound system and so on and so forth, but using a microphone so that people can hear, so a large distance can be covered, so more people could hear the adhan. Is it bid'ah? No, not only would it not be bid'ah, on the basis of that understanding, it would actually be something that's beloved. You're allowing more people to live the sunnah. You're allowing more people to understand the sunnah and to take from it. Also, sometimes there's a hadith, So for example, those of you that are in the Sahih al-Bukhari class in Valley Ranch Masjid, we mentioned Raddu salam, responding with a salam to someone who's not Muslim, the hukum of it, the ruling of it. The Prophet ﷺ said that if someone from the Christians and the Jews says salam to you, then you should say wa alaykum, and upon you. However, the vast majority of scholars say if a Christian or a Jew says assalamu alaykum to you, you should say wa alaykum assalam. How is it that they rejected a clear hadith? All right, the context of it, that back then Bani Qurayza and Banu Nadir and Banu Qaynuqa and so on and so forth, they used to say to the Prophet ﷺ, assalamu alaykum. Wassam obviously is not salam. Sam would be wishing death and sickness and curse upon a person. But they'd say it really, really fast, so you couldn't understand if they were saying assam or assalam. Are they wishing death on you or are they wishing peace on you? So the Prophet ﷺ said, respond with wa alaykum. However, the vast majority of the ulama, of the scholars, they said to respond wa alaykum assalam if you can hear them say assalamu alaykum. That would constitute an apparent rejection of the hadith, but it's not a rejection of the hadith. Also, for example, the very contentious issue, if someone walks into the masjid and the imam is giving khutbah, all right? We're going to get to this, how a hadith can be understood in different ways. If the imam is giving khutbah and you walk into the masjid, there's a clear hadith where the Prophet ﷺ told one of the companions to stand up and pray. Do you pray tahiyatul masjid or not? Wait a minute, how is that possible? That there are some scholars that said that if a person walks in the masjid and the imam is giving khutbah, sit down. Okay? The Ahnaf and the Malikiyah, they have the opinion that the Prophet ﷺ was speaking to a poor companion. So I'm going to show you guys usul at work here. He was speaking to a poor companion when he told him to stand up and pray 2 rak'ahs. And the Prophet ﷺ, he wanted by that, and yubayyina halihi. He wanted to show the hal of that companion. He wanted to show the situation of that companion. So when he pointed out to him, stand up and pray, the Sahaba would see clearly the poverty that he was in. All right? Now, Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala, Imam al-Shafi'i, they said that doesn't matter, even if that was the case, because the Prophet ﷺ would never order something to be done that's not from the religion to make a point without clarifying it. So the hukum still stands, the ruling still stands. However, is there room to argue the other point? Yes, there is room to argue the other point, that if a person walks in and the imam is giving khutbah, that the Prophet ﷺ was making an exception here. There's still room to have this discussion. It's not as black and white once you understand the reason for the disagreement, the reason for the dispute. And so it's very, very important to study the context. So inshallah ta'ala, we're going to go through some of the causes of difference of opinion, how these things happen. There are 2 books that I'll recommend to you guys inshallah ta'ala. One of them is from Shah Waliullah. It's called Al-Insaf fi Bayan Sabab al-Ikhtilaf. Al-Insaf fi Bayan Sabab al-Ikhtilaf. The other one is a book by Imam bin Uthaymin rahimahullah ta'ala, which is called Al-Khilafu Bayn al-Ulama'i wa Asbabuhu wa Mawqifuna minhu. Al-Khilafu Bayn al-Ulama'i wa Asbabuhu wa Mawqifuna minhu. All right, so these are 2 books that are very nicely written, which basically explain how ulama could differ in the presence of a hadith. And so we'll go through some of these reasons. One of them is that simply that the evidence or that the hadith was not known to the scholar at the time he issued his judgment. That is a possibility. It happened even amongst the Sahaba. A lot of people take great offense to that. And again, we have to be intellectually honest when we study history. Even the Sahaba, there were some Sahaba that did not know certain hadith. And we find many, many, many different examples of that. In the time of Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, we find that there was a plague in Sham. Okay? And when Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, when that plague broke out, he asked the Sahaba what they thought should be done. And they all had different opinions. Then Abdurrahman bin Auf radiallahu ta'ala anhu came and he said, I heard the Prophet ﷺ say that if a plague breaks out in the land, then don't go there. If you're not there, don't go there. And if you're there, don't leave there. If plague breaks out, if you're there, don't leave. And if you're not there, don't go. So once Abdurrahman bin Auf came with, I heard the Prophet ﷺ say this, all the Sahaba said, okay, there it goes then. So they had different opinions before that, but Abdurrahman bin Auf said, wait, but I heard the Prophet ﷺ speak about this issue. So that shows you that the Sahaba did not know the hadith. In fact, I'll give you a very perplexing fiqh issue as well. What's the iddah of a pregnant woman? What is the iddah, the waiting period of a pregnant woman? Until she delivers, right? None of the brothers knew. That's a problem, by the way. All right. What's the iddah of a widow? 4 months and 10 days. Okay. Now, what's the iddah of a pregnant widow? You see the problem here? There are two texts, very clear. The iddah of a pregnant woman in the Quran is ajalahunna and yada'na hamlahunna. That their waiting period is until it ends when they deliver a baby. Whereas the iddah of a widow, وَالَّذِينَ يَتَوَفَّوْنَ مِنْكُمْ وَيَذَرُونَ أَزْوَاجًا يَتَرَبَّصْنَ بِأَنفُسِهِنَّ أَرْبَعَةَ أَشْهُرٍ وَعَشْرًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and about the woman whose husband passes away, that their iddah would be 4 months and 10 days. So what's the ruling on a widow who is pregnant? What happens there? So the Sahaba had a dilemma. Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu and Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhu, they initially ruled that she should wait the longer period of the two. The longer period of the two would mean that, again, let's say that my pregnancy ended, or that I delivered a baby 2 months after my husband passed away. Then I'll still have to wait till 4 months and 10 days. Or if I'm still pregnant when 4 months and 10 days finishes, I need to wait until I deliver the baby. You guys understand? So that was the opinion of Ali and Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhu initially. But then they found the hadith. One of the companions came forth, Abu Musa radiallahu ta'ala anhu, and he said that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he permitted Subay'a radiallahu ta'ala anha, al-Aslamiyya, Subay'a al-Aslamiyya, to get married only a few nights after her husband passed away. Why? Because she gave birth the day after her husband passed away. So she gave birth the day after her husband passed away, and the Prophet ﷺ allowed her to get married just a few nights after. Meaning the Prophet ﷺ ended her iddah with the shorter of the two. So Ali and Ibn Abbas reversed the opinion then. So there are numerous examples I can give. There are over 100 of them actually that are listed. One of them is kind of funny, that Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu was sitting in his house, and Abu Musa al-Ash'ari radiallahu anhu came and he knocked on his door, and he sought permission to enter 3 times, and then he left. And Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu was sitting in his house, and basically, him and Abu Musa were boys. So he was like, why did you wait for me to come receive you at the door? You should have just knocked and then came in. All right, give it some time and then came in. Abu Musa said, but I heard the Prophet ﷺ say that if you seek permission 3 times and you're not given permission, then you leave. So Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he said, are you sure the Prophet ﷺ said that? He said, yeah, I'm sure the Prophet ﷺ said that. He said, get some other Sahaba that have heard the Prophet ﷺ hear that too. So Abu Musa radiallahu anhu goes and he tries to find some other Sahaba that have heard the Prophet ﷺ say that as well. And Umar radiallahu anhu makes him establish that more Sahaba heard that as well, because Umar radiallahu anhu was surprised that he never heard that from the Prophet ﷺ. Okay? So this is something that took place. There's no doubt about it, that sometimes a judgment was made even by a companion without knowing a hadith that was explicit in regards to that case. There's another, number 2, the second reason could be that the hadith is known to the scholar. This is especially in regards to ashab al-ra'i, the people of opinion, like Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, that they know a hadith, but they doubt its authenticity. So others are convinced of its authenticity, but they have doubts about its authenticity, and they would rather rely upon their reasoning until they're sure about its authenticity. Meaning, we're going to put this on the side, we'll investigate it, and if we find it to be authentic, then we'll reverse our opinion. But in the meantime, I'd rather go with my reasoning until I'm 100% sure that the hadith is authentic. It also happened in the time of the Sahaba, when Fatima bint Qais radiallahu ta'ala anha, when she was divorced the 3rd time. Fatima bint Qais was married to a companion by the name of Abu Amr ibn Hafs. And when Abu Amr divorced her the 3rd time, meaning it was an irrevocable divorce, they didn't know what to do in regards to the iddah, in regards to the waiting period. So it wasn't clear, because it seems like that was the first triple divorce in Islam. All right. Before then, they were used to the concept of one divorce, and then the iddah either expires or a woman is taken back. This was the first time, it seems, that there was a triple divorce in Islam, that there were 3 divorces given to one person. So they didn't know what to do, so she went to, she went to her home. She left the house after the 3rd divorce, and he sent her some barley. And she thought that that was really cheap and really insulting and whatever it was, that he sent her some barley. So they didn't know what to do, whether there is a iddah or not, whether there is nafaqah, whether there is maintenance that's due or not, whether he has to give her anything at that point or not. And the Prophet ﷺ, instead, he decided that because it was the final case of talaq, because in the other 2 talaqs, when there's a revocable talaq, the woman stays in the home even as she's in her iddah. And, there's a chance for her to be taken back and so on and so forth. But in the 3rd case, the Prophet ﷺ told Fatima bint Qais to go and stay with one of the sahabiyat. Okay, so he completely absolved the relationship and to finish her iddah there. So there was a iddah there before she can get remarried, but she did not stay in the home of her husband after that because there was no chance of them ever getting back together at that point. Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, when he heard that narration, all right, he doubted its authenticity. Okay, so he said that until I'm sure of it, until I'm able to confirm it, this was in his khilafah, he said that we'll act upon the first ayah of Surah Al-Talaq, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لا تخرجوهن من بيوتهن, that do not make them leave their homes. So he said, until I'm sure of the authenticity of the hadith, then I'm still going to act upon this. So this was true with the Sahaba, it was true with the scholars, especially Ashabul Ra'i. Okay, especially when it came to the people of opinion, again, that were in Iraq, and that we're dealing with many fabricated ahadith and people making things up and philosophies and so on and so forth. Number 3 is that the scholar forgot the hadith when he made the judgment. And this is again very difficult. How can a scholar forget a hadith? Okay, I can tell you in my mini capacity, and I'm not comparing myself to any of these Imams, and I can tell you that there are many times that I memorize a hadith, but when I was asked a question, I wasn't able to bring that hadith to that answer. I didn't relate it, or I forgot it, or something of that sort. SubhanAllah, as soon as I went home, I remembered it, and then I called the person back, right? Because sometimes it's there, but it's not there, right? You're just not connecting it to the incident or something of that sort. And and Imam al-Dihlawi says, even the Prophet ﷺ forgot. When did he forget? In Salah, for example. The Prophet ﷺ, after Salah, he forgot a verse, and he said to Ubay ibn Ka'b radiallahu anhu, why didn't you remind me of the verse? Why didn't you remind me of the ayah? So he thought that the Prophet ﷺ just simply omitted it, or it was abrogated, and the Prophet ﷺ said, no, I'm a human being, sometimes I forget. So to say that, A'udhu billah, how could you say that Malik or Abu Hanifa or Shafi'i or Ahmed could forget is wrong. Or to say that about any Sahabi, or to say it about any scholar. And subhanAllah, once again with the Sahaba, we see that one time Umar ibn Khattab and Ammar ibn Yasir, may Allah be pleased with them, they went out on a journey and they woke up in a state of janaba, meaning they needed to do ghusl. They needed to take showers. Now here's the problem. During this travel, and there was this caravan, whatever it was, they both needed to do ghusl, and there was no water. So what do? Do they do tayammum? What do they do? What do you do if you need to do ghusl and you're on a plane, and there's no water in the sink? What do? Do you just not pray? What's the hukum? What's the ruling? What do you do? Okay, sisters as well. What do you do if at the time of your tuhur, your purity, there's no water? You do tayammum? How do you do tayammum? Do you put dirt all over your body, or do you just do the regular? Okay, so how did that hukum come about? Umar and Ammar didn't know what to do. Ammar radiallahu ta'ala, you know what he did? He started rolling around in the dirt. He said, water, he just used his qiyas, he used his reasoning. He said, okay, fine, well that's tayammum for wudu. He said, but we don't know what to do for ghusl. He said, I'm just going to get dirt all over my body. So he started rolling around in the dirt. Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu said, forget that, I'll just do ghusl when I get home and I'll make up the prayer. And that's what Umar radiallahu anhu did. So they both took their different opinions completely all together. Even the Sahaba of the Prophet ﷺ, they came to the Prophet ﷺ, and Rasulullah ﷺ, when he was asked about it, the Prophet ﷺ, he laughed and he said, Ya Ammar, it would have been enough for you to just strike the dirt with your hands and wipe your face. You didn't have to roll around in the dirt. Now, Ammar radiallahu anhu, he told people about this hukum and so on and so forth. He mentioned this incident. Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, when he was the Khalifa and he heard that Ammar was telling people that they don't need to do ghusl if they don't have water, he needed to clarify it. So he brought Ammar back in, and he told Ammar, what is it that you're telling the people about? And he's saying, remember the incident where me and you went out and we were, in a journey and there was a caravan and we didn't know what to do? And Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu said, okay, yeah, I remember. Meaning, I remember that incident now. So Ammar brought it back to Umar radiallahu anhu's attention that, remember, we had this incident, this is where I'm deriving this hukum from. And what it could mean is that Ammar, when he went to the Prophet ﷺ and asked him about it, Umar was not present. But the point is that Ammar went and he reminded Umar of the incident and he told him what happened as a result of that. And Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu said, are you sure, O Ammar? And he said, yes. And Ammar said, look, if you want, I won't tell anyone anymore. And Umar radiallahu anhu said, no, if you're sure that this is what the Prophet ﷺ told you as a result of that incident, then go ahead and share that. It's okay, you can keep teaching that. So that's number 3. Number 4 is that the scholar is aware of the evidence, but he understands it differently. So the same evidence is presented to two different ulama, but they understand it differently, based on other ahadith, based on the language, based on different things, that they have a way of understanding it differently. And this happens many, many, many times amongst the Sahaba and amongst the Madhab. So for example, what does it mean, لا جناح عليكم إن طلقتم النساء لم تمسوهن? There's no blame on a person, or there's nothing due on a person whenever he divorces a woman and he has not touched her. Is a lams here a touch? This is a very big issue in the Arabic language and in Islamic jurisprudence. What does lams mean? Okay, does it mean to be intimate? Does it mean to almost be intimate? Or does it mean just a touch? Okay, so for example, you'll see that the Shafi'is take the touch literally. Okay, whereas other madhahib provide more context to it. Imam Ahmad rahimahullah found the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ kissing Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha while he was fasting. And the Prophet ﷺ didn't break his fast, and the Prophet ﷺ didn't renew his wudu. So Imam Ahmad originally was acting upon the opinion of Imam al-Shafi'i in regards to a lams. Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala, after that, in regards to that hadith, he took that hadith, he acted upon that hadith instead. So it's, a lot of times you'll find the scholars disagreeing about that. So they'll take into consideration what Maryam says, لَمْ يَمْسَسْنِي بَشَرٌ وَلَمْ أَكُ بَغِيًّا. I've never been touched by a man. What did Maryam alayhi salam mean when she said, I've never been touched by a man? What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mean whenever he talks, whenever he mentions lams in the Quran? Is it referring to intercourse, or is it referring to something close to it? Or is it referring to a literal touch? Also, the very famous incident that took place in the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, when the Prophet ﷺ said, no one of you should pray Asr until he reaches Banu Qurayza. That's the very famous example in Khilaf. Okay? No one of you should pray his Asr until he reaches Banu Qurayza. Now, the Prophet ﷺ, what he meant by that was to hurry up. Okay? Hurry up. Don't stop and pray Asr now. We'll get to Banu Qurayza and then we'll pray Asr. Now the Sahaba got delayed and Asr was ending on the way to Banu Qurayza. Some of them prayed. So some of them understood the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, the injunction to say we need to pray now. Some of them waited until they got to Banu Qurayza, and it was after the adhan of Maghrib, and they prayed Asr then. And the Prophet ﷺ, he approved the actions of both of them. Alright? So some of them understood it, and this is an usuli discussion. All right? In the presence of something that is specific, do you take a general statement and then do away with that which is specific? Meaning, we know that Asr ends at the time of Maghrib. The Prophet ﷺ gave us a vague statement. Will we use the vague statement to do away with what we already know specifically to be true? Or will we take the specific statement and say that the Prophet ﷺ, because this is a statement that can be interpreted in many ways, we'll stick to what we know that's specific. From an usuli perspective, the Sahaba that stopped and prayed Asr were right from an usuli perspective. But the Prophet ﷺ understood that those companions used their best reasoning in the presence of that statement of his, ﷺ. And they did what they did, and the Prophet ﷺ did not censor any of them. And that's the point here, okay? That the Prophet ﷺ, even in his time, he understood that the Sahaba can understand things in different ways. The fifth one, and this is a very, very important one, the scholar is aware of the hadith and considers it to be authentic, but he also considers it to be mansukh, abrogated. If you don't understand an-naskh wal-mansukh in hadith, you will drive yourself insane. I see it all the time, even in issues of aqeedah, by the way. All right? You'll take a hadith that the Prophet ﷺ said early on in Islam, and then the Prophet ﷺ reversed that ruling, and you use that hadith and you say, it's in al-Muwatta, it's in al-Bukhari, right? What do you mean? All right? And that's a very, very, very serious issue. So for example, having to do wudu after eating something that was cooked by fire. Do we have to do that now? Every time we eat food that's been cooked by fire. There is a hadith, there was a time in Islam where if you ate anything that was touched by the fire, meaning cooked food, you had to do wudu every time. All four of the madhabs, though, believe that to be an abrogated hadith. Okay? Also, for example, we find that in the salah, Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu says that when the prayer was first obligated, when salah was first made fard, he said that we were allowed to speak in our salah, just like we do in tawaf. We can still talk to each other in prayer. So he said a man would come and he would ask his friend, how many rak'ahs of prayer are left? All right? Can you imagine that? Salaam alaikum. How many rak'ahs are we? Why is this Imam reading Surah Al-Baqarah and Maghrib, right? The point is that they could talk to each other. They wouldn't have these long drawn out conversations. Just like now in tawaf, you got some people hanging, talking on their cell phones the entire way. You got some people that'll say, how many rounds do we have left? How many have we done? They'll say some basic things here and there. Other than that, it becomes excessive. But even in salah at one point, if someone sneezed, you said alhamdulillah, another person said yarhamukallah. Now, there was once where a companion came and he didn't hear the abrogation. So he went out on a journey and the Prophet ﷺ abrogated that where salah was now made prohibited. And this guy came in, he said Salaamu Alaikum, he's a companion, he said Salaamu Alaikum. No one said Wa Alaikum As-Salam. Then he sneezed and he said Alhamdulillah. No one said Yarhamukallah. So he got upset. He said, what's wrong with you people? Ma bikum. Right? What's going on with you guys? Why aren't you talking? So the Sahaba couldn't respond to him, so they instead started like sending him signs like be quiet. And he kept talking throughout the salah. Right? Like, did you lose your minds? What's going on with you people? Because he didn't hear the abrogation. Miskeen. He's just talking to them the entire salah. And the Prophet ﷺ, after the salah, he made it clear. He said, look, whoever was speaking, let him know that this used to be halal. So he validated what the man did, but now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prohibited it. Khalas, it's over. All right? Simple as that. So that's also something, in one case, the abrogations. And even, by the way, we find in Bukhari something that took place. Salah, initially, when people used to do ruku', the Prophet ﷺ, he legislated that instead of putting, in the bowing motion, instead of putting the hands above the knees, on the thighs above the knees, the Prophet ﷺ used to clasp his hands. So when you do ruku', you would basically put your hands between, and you would clasp your hands. All right, there's a podium here, so I can't demonstrate it to you guys. But again, instead of putting your hands on your legs, you'll actually clasp them together. Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu went out on a journey, and he came back, and Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu, and he is who he is, was unaware of the abrogation. So Ibn Mas'ud was also putting his hands together when he did ruku', and then it was made clear to Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu ta'ala anhu that the Prophet ﷺ taught the Sahaba now to put their hands above their knees. So Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu acted in accordance with that. So there are times that a hadith is authentic, but a hadith is abrogated, it's mansukh, and there are times that a scholar might see a hadith, but he'll consider it to be mansukh, like Imam Malik rahimahullah said again about al-Muwatta, that sometimes we leave a hadith so that people can know anna ala ilmin tarakna, that there are some things that we left in here, some ahadith, so that people don't say Imam Malik must not have known the hadith. I left it there so that people know that we know the hadith, but we decided to act in accordance with other evidence. All right. Number 6. Sometimes the scholar believes that the evidence presented is authentic. It's authentic hadith. All right. And he has no way of knowing whether it's been abrogated or not. So he doesn't know whether it's abrogated or not. Studying whether hadith is mansukh, you'll study the age of the narrator, you'll study many, many different factors. All right. He can't tell, so he knows it's authentic. He can't tell, but there is a stronger text in his opinion that contradicts it. A stronger text contradicts it. Or, many of the scholars, they said that a consensus will take precedence over that. if there's an authentic hadith that's abrogated, or that you can't tell is abrogated, and it seems to be clear-cut, but there is a consensus amongst the companions on an issue, then it must mean that we're not getting something about the hadith. All right? So we'll see many different times, and that's why we said Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala, he said that, instead of claiming consensus on an issue, say, لا نعلم خلافا في ذلك. We just don't know of another opinion. Imam Ahmad was very afraid of people shutting the door on different opinions by saying that there was a consensus. I'll give you guys an example of this, and please don't ask me for too much detail on the riba part here because it has to do with riba. I don't want this to become an Islamic finance class right now. There are two ahadith in Sahih Muslim. They're both in Sahih Muslim. One of them that the Prophet ﷺ says that riba is only on an-nasi'ah. Now riba an-nasi'ah is what's known as riba al-jahiliyyah, the interest in the days of ignorance. What is it? Essentially it's late fees. The riba in the days of ignorance was that, I loan you $100, you pay me back $100 in a month. If you don't pay it back to me in a month, then I'll add $20. Okay? So riba al-jahiliyyah, what's known as the days of ignorance, the riba in the days of ignorance is late fees. That's what they used to do, so they kept on burying people in debt, which is what credit card companies do today. And unfortunately, even sometimes, Islamic schools do these things, by the way, not knowing the ruling on it. It's something good to correct sometimes. I've seen Islamic schools implement it. There are other ways to penalize in Islam that are allowed to penalize someone that owes you money, but adding the amount to it is not permissible. So the concept of a late fee is impermissible. It's actually the origin of riba in Islam. So there's a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said that riba is only a nasi'ah. There's another hadith where the Prophet ﷺ says that riba is a nasi'ah wa ziyada. Okay? And the second type of riba here in this hadith is what's known as az-ziyada or al-fadl. Az-ziyada or al-fadl, which means an increase. What's the difference between the two? Okay? Al-riba al-fadl is when you exchange two things, two commodities. So let's say that, I'll give you 1 coin of gold and you give me back 2 coins of gold. So the same commodity is exchanged, but one of them is given at a higher rate. So Abu Sa'id al-Khudri radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he mentioned a man came to the Prophet ﷺ and mentioned that he had some dates. He traded those dates for another set of dates and a greater amount of it. The Prophet ﷺ told him that this was riba. He said, instead sell your dates and then buy the other type of date. Right? Buy the other types of dates. So the Prophet ﷺ mentioned, al-dhahab lil-dhahab wal-fidda lil-fidda. Gold should be for gold, silver for silver. Okay. Dates for dates, barley for barley, wheat for wheat, so on and so forth. The Prophet ﷺ mentioned different categories. All right. Now there's, because the two hadith are here, one of them where the Prophet ﷺ mentions an-nasi'ah and the other one where the Prophet ﷺ mentions, al-fadl. All right, there's an opinion that's traced to Ibn Abbas radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. كَانَ لَا يَرَى بَأْسًا أَنْ يُبَاعَ الذَّهَبُ بِالذَّهَبِ مُتَفَاضِلًا وَالْفِضَّةُ بِالْفِضَّةِ مُتَفَاضِلًا إِذَا كَانَ يَدًا بِيَدٍ. Okay, وَقَالْ إِنَّمَا الرِّبَى فِي النَّسِيئَةِ. There's something that's traced to Ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhu where he didn't consider it riba, the second type, which is to trade gold and gold or silver and silver at a higher exchange rate, on the condition that it's done in the same setting. So a lot of people will use this opinion by Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu, by the way, to justify modern day interest. They'll say Ibn Abbas said there's no issue with taking money and then paying back a higher amount. But Ibn Abbas also stipulated yadan bi yadin, that it has to be done in the same setting, which never happens now. Okay? That's not the way a modern loan will work anyway. So this doesn't apply. Now, why did Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu have that opinion? Either Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhu thought that the first hadith was stronger than the second hadith. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, this is a third position by the way from Ibn al-Qayyim. So the majority of scholars say both of these are pure riba. And they're of the same level of gravity, the same degree. The second opinion is the opinion that's been traced to Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhu, that riba is only on an-nasi'ah. It's not on al-fadl. That it's permissible in the same context, the same setting to exchange two things of the same commodity at a higher rate. And then there's a third opinion which is from Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, where he says that the prohibition of al-fadl was out of precaution. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was prohibiting a ziyada out of precaution, out of fear that they would fall into a nasi'ah, that they would fall into the greater riba. So an-nasi'a is greater than al-fadl. It's greater than a ziyada in regards to crime, in regards to the severity of the punishment. One of them has kiraha in it, the other one has tahrim in it. One of them is disliked severely, one of them is absolutely forbidden. So you can see how the same text can come into all this discussion, right? Two ahadith that are both authentic, that seem to contradict one another. Now another twist on that is that it's Sa'id ibn al-Jubayr says that when Ibn Abbas was made aware of the other hadith, then he changed his opinion as well. But we don't have a direct quote from Ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhu. So one hadith can be the subject of multiple opinions here, and that's something that takes place. Finally, a scholar can make a judgment on the basis of a weak hadith, or a fabricated hadith even, or just a wrong ijtihad, the wrong reasoning based on the hadith. He reasoned wrong when he looked at the hadith. He didn't understand the context of it, and he reasoned wrong on the basis of it. Now again, especially in the early days of Islam, you had a lot of hadith that were being fabricated and so on and so forth, and some of them were actually with good intentions. So for example, there was a man that fabricated all of these ahadith about the fada'il of various surahs, like the virtues of various surahs. Almost every hadith you've ever heard in your life, I'm telling you now, that came into your mailbox, your email, whatever it is, or through a text message that said, read this surah and you'll get this, is a fabricated hadith. And it was made up by the same man. And he said that I did that because I saw people getting obsessed with the fiqh of Abu Hanifa. I wanted them to busy themselves with the Quran. So he started making up all these ahadith about the virtues of certain surahs of the Quran and so on and so forth. And he said it was because of Abu Hanifa. I saw people getting distracted from Quran and getting obsessed with fiqh. Okay? So obviously these ahadith, they're classed as fabricated and so on and so forth, but a lot of times, or it could be that a scholar sees a hadith and he considers it to be authentic and it's not really authentic. Now as we said, sometimes a hadith became weak later on in Islamic history, which makes this a little complicated because a hadith that's weak now might not have been weak when Abu Hanifa saw it, because it became weak in the later part of the sanad. So that's what complicates it as well. So from min bab husn al-dhann, having good assumptions of our ulama, we'll say that maybe the hadith was authentic when it came to them. A wrong ijtihad, a very common one that's used by the examples, the Prophet ﷺ says, "Zakatul janini, zakatu ummihi." Zakatul janini, zakatu ummihi. Which means that if you slaughter an animal and it's pregnant, you don't have to re-slaughter the animal that the animal was pregnant with, the fetus. The janeen is not to be slaughtered after that. All right. Some of the scholars though took the hadith literally, and they said "Zakatul janini, zakatu ummihi" means that you have to slaughter the fetus the same way that you slaughtered the mother. It's a very odd opinion. Okay. But from a language perspective, can you make it out to be that way? Yes, you can. But it's a wrong ijtihad. It's a wrong opinion. I mentioned that was the last one, but actually I'll mention the last one here, which is very crucial, but we're not going to give any examples, which is that sometimes scholars disagree on the authenticity of the hadith. It's just as simple as that. Sometimes scholars disagree on the authenticity of the hadith. Now, lastly, and I'm running out of time, I hope Ustad Adam will give me 5 more minutes, inshallah ta'ala, but what is our position now in regards to following a madhab? This is like the question that we always get asked. There are a few things to keep in mind. Number one, a madhab is a set of usul, it's not a set of fatawa. It's a set of principles on how to derive opinions, it's not a set of opinions. That's one of the greatest misunderstandings of what a madhab is in the first place. There is no such thing as a madhab being a set of opinions. If you're Shafi'i, you will do this, 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 and that. If you're Hanafi, you will do this, 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 and that. That, هذا مفهوم خطأ. That's one of the worst ways to understand a madhab. No scholar has ever understood a madhab to be that way. If that was the case, we'd only have 4 opinions on every issue. But we find sometimes 20 opinions within the same madhab, especially the Hanafi madhab, by the way, because the Hanafi madhab has the most flexibility in it. Sometimes you'll find 20, 30 opinions on one mas'ala within the Hanafi madhab. But for some reason people think if you're Hanafi you have to do it this way. Right? A madhab is a set of usul, not a set of opinions. That's number one. Number two, the ruling on following a madhab differs from person to person. It depends on your capability as well, where you are at as well. It's not a one-size-fits-all type of thing. Number three, following a madhab is not an issue of faith. It's not an issue of iman or aqeedah. You cannot say, and the reason why I say that is you cannot say a person is sinful because of how they approach this topic. It's impossible to say that, to add this as a condition of faith and to make someone out to be athim, to be sinful, whether they do taqleed or they completely do, the opposite of taqleed, whether they follow a madhab or not. If a Muslim says that, you know what, I'm not going to follow a madhab, you can't make that person sinful, because it's not a condition of faith that was given by Allah or the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is an issue of how to approach fiqh. It's not an issue of faith. If that was the case, if a person was athim, sinful on how they approach the subject, then that would mean that the minute that someone takes shahada, you need to assign them a madhab. Like takbir, Allahu Akbar, mashallah, welcome to Islam. All right, what madhab do you want to be? Because if he dies that night, I'm just approaching it from a pure usuli perspective. If he dies that night, he's sinful if he doesn't have a madhab. If you want to approach it that way and say that a person is sinful if they choose not to follow a madhab, then you've made that person die athim. You made them die in a sinful state. So it's not an issue of faith, it's an issue of finding the best approach. So let's go through this inshallah ta'ala. The linguistic meaning of the word taqleed. The linguistic meaning of the word taqleed. What does it mean? Does anyone know what taqleed means? Blind following. That's the English translation, but what's the linguistic meaning? Okay, التقليد مأخوذ من القلادة. Okay, التقليد مأخوذ من القلادة وهي ما جعلت في العنق. Okay, so taqleed is something that's hanging on your neck. It's grabbing you from the neck. What it means that you are suspending yourself to something. All right, and that's the linguistic meaning. A qilada, something that's placed around the neck. So it's binding upon you. The technical meaning of taqleed is to follow without knowing the evidence. To follow without knowing the evidence. That's the technical meaning of taqleed. Now, again, so that's the meaning of it. Now, how do we approach it? Now, you'll always find that all four of the Imams say, إِذَا صَحَّ الْحَدِيث فَهُوَ مَذْهَبِي. If the hadith is authentic, then it's my madhab. But we said that you have to be in a certain position to be able to analyze that in the first place. When the Imams said, إِذَا صَحَّ الْحَدِيث فَهُوَ مَذْهَبِي, that if the hadith is authentic, then it's my madhab, they weren't speaking to a Muslim that doesn't know how to read Arabic and that doesn't know how to, that doesn't know the ABCs of the religion. They're speaking to people that are in a position to analyze evidence, that are in a position to understand as-sahih wal-da'if, that are in a position to understand lughatul madhab, all right, the language of the madhab and so on and so forth, and an-nasakh wal-mansukh fil Quran wal-hadith and all these different types of things, abrogation. All right, so that's something that's applied to students of knowledge. That statement is to be applied to students of knowledge. And we said, Imam al-Shafi'i told Imam Ahmad, if you find a hadith that's authentic, let us know and we will act upon it. Those types of statements, right? Between the Imams. However, you also find that Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah told his students, and this is now to everyone, he said, don't follow my opinion without knowing my evidence. Meaning you should know where I got it from. Even if you're not going to question it, even if you're going to follow something, even if you're going to follow that and other evidence comes, in the picture and you still say, I'm going to follow the opinion of this Imam, you should still know his evidence. And when Allah says in the Quran, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ, ask the people of knowledge when you don't know, فَاسْأَلُوا أَيْ تَحَقَّقْ. You need to, you don't just ask them, what should I do? You ask them, why should I do what you're telling me to do? Not in a confrontational way, not in a standoffish way, but you should know why you're doing the things that you're doing. Now, if it's a quick issue and it's a quick, something that you're going through, like, you're traveling somewhere and you don't know how to deal with jama' and qasr in this situation, whether you shorten or combine, and you want to just call your imam, you don't have time to do tahaqquq at that point. Just, what should I do right now? Or we have a group of people, should we pray Jum'ah or Dhuhr? You just get the opinion. But generally speaking, you should still know why you're following certain things. This is how we protect our religion. The scholar should not be arrogant to a point that he doesn't want people to ask him why. I absolutely despise when a scholar is asked a question and he says, you don't have the credentials to ask me. That's not true. Everyone is in a position to ask, as long as they're asking with adab. And the scholar should always have the forbearance to prove his point and to accept those questions and to say, this is how I derive this opinion. A scholar should never shoot people down and say, do you know where I'm from? You wouldn't be able to understand my terminology. A scholar should still give some sort of evidence as to why they follow the opinion that they follow. All right? So there's an issue here, right? Is it ittiba' or is it taqleed in the first place? Are you following, or are you following with evidence, or are you blind following? It depends on your state. Now I'm going to throw in a twist here, inshallah ta'ala, and then we're gonna end with this twist, because this is very important. There's a great Hanafi scholar by the name of Ibn Abidin. Ibn Abidin is one of the greatest Hanafi scholars of all time. He's considered probably top 5 in the Hanafi school of thought. Ibn Abidin. He wrote Al-Hashiyah. He wrote his work of Al-Hashiyah, Hashiyah Ibn Abidin, and he actually addresses, and it's kind of a tangent, but it's historical. It's in Kitab al-Hudud actually. He goes on this tangent about following a madhab. All right? And listen to what he says. He says, Al-Amiyu la madhab lahu, that for the ami, for the person who's a common person, he has no madhab, bal madhabuhu madhabu muftihi. His madhab is the madhab of the one that's giving him fatwa. All right, I'm going to say that again. Al-Amiyu la madhab lahu, bal madhabuhu madhabu muftihi. The madhab of the common person is the madhab of the one who he's asking, the one who's giving him fatwa. Okay? And I'll read the paragraph inshallah ta'ala. وَعَلَّلَهُ في شرح التحرير بأن المذهب إنما يكون لمن له نوع نظر واستدلال وبصر بالمذهب على حسبه أو لمن قرأ كتابا في فروع ذلك المذهب وعرف فتاوى الإمام وأقواله. Okay? So he goes through this. He says that the person who does not have any knowledge, he's a common person, essentially asks a living scholar for fatwa. He goes to a living scholar. His madhab becomes the madhab of that scholar. Whatever that scholar is who's giving you fatwa, that's going to be your madhab. But he says there is no point in the common person becoming hawkish and saying, I'm a Hanafi, I'm a Maliki, I'm a Shafi'i, I'm a Hanbali, and fighting with people over that. Instead, he should be humble, and because in order to be a Hanafi, you need to know what a Hanafi is in the first place. You need to understand the usul of the Hanaf. You need to understand the aqad. And I'm not putting anyone down here, but look, some of you had madhab, and be honest, did you know the usul of your madhab before you took this class? Probably not. It was just something you grew up with, right? It's like I said, my dad, they grew up as Hanabila and Tul Karam, but they all pray like Ahnaf, okay? But they say we're Hanbalis. We are all Hanabila. So there's no point of a person getting caught up with the label of it. Instead, the madhab of a person is the madhab of the scholar that he goes to, because no one can really properly have a school of thought unless they have perspective, know the evidences, know the language, know the ikhtilaf, they know the differences of opinion, and so on and so forth within that madhab. They have to have studied the usul. So a scholar has to have gone through the usul of a madhab. There is no scholar in the world that is of any weight that does not belong to a madhab. That meaning, in some way, that hasn't studied the procedure and studied the usul of a madhab. When that scholar gives you fatwa, you are bound by the madhab of that scholar. What that means is, go to someone that is living. If you're in the position of a commoner, you go to someone that is a living scholar, you ask that person questions, and you're consistent with it, and you will naturally be within the discipline of a madhab when you do that. You're naturally, when you're constantly going to a Shafi'i scholar or a Hanafi scholar, and you can choose that based on your discretion, how you've grown up. You go to a scholar that's on the Book of Allah and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, that has all of the qualifications of a sheikh, and you trust their knowledge, and you ask them questions, then you fall into the discipline of a madhab, whether you like it or not, essentially. You're going to end up within the scope of these 4 schools of thought. But then it comes to, and I'm going to end with this, am I bound by a madhab? Am I bound by a madhab? Does that mean that it's impermissible for me to have a different opinion than what's come down to me from my madhab, or come down to me from my scholar who represents a certain madhab or something of that sort? Is it impermissible for me to switch madhabs? Okay? Now, this is called, by the way, talfiq. To join opinions is called talfiq. All right, joining opinions between different schools and different approaches. When do you think it becomes a problem? When you just take the easiest one of every madhab. All right, and it's not necessarily just the 4 schools of thought. It's the Palestinians call it Imam al-Bahbahani. All right, you just go and you'll find the easy opinion in each and every single madhab. You'll be Hanafi one day, you'll be Zahiri one day, you'll be Shafi. You don't care as long as it's easy. You know, I like that madhab, I like that opinion, I'm going to follow that one. And it's not on the basis of evidence or understanding or that you saw hadith or evidence that was more compelling to you. It's just that it's easier. And you said, hey, I'm going to do that. This is what Imam an-Nawawi rahimahullah calls ittiba' al-rukhas. And Imam an-Nawawi wrote a book called Al-Maqasid. Imam an-Nawawi rahimahullah, he said, ittiba' al-rukhas, to just follow the easiest opinion of every madhab, is actually ittiba' al-hawa. It's following your empty desires, and that's when it can become impermissible. So it's not about changing madhabs, it's about why you're following different opinions. Your basis for doing so is that you want to find a way out. And they'll use the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ or Aisha radiallahu anha saying that the Prophet ﷺ, if two issues or two matters were presented to him, he always took aysarahuma, he took the easier one. But there was no ambiguity in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. Meaning if two things that were clearly halal, all right, were presented, clear halal options, then you take the easier one. But the problem is when you only seek out the easiest opinion in each madhab, ittiba' al-rukhas. That is an issue, that is a problem, and that is dishonesty to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it becomes problematic. However, and this is what I want to give you guys inshallah, let's say that you're traveling, and let's say that you're with a group of people, and let's say that your shaykh is of the opinion, which is narrated from Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu ta'ala anhu, in the common Hanafi opinion, that there is no qasr, or there is no jama', that you don't combine dhuhr and asr. But you're with a group of people, and they're going to combine dhuhr and asr. Every Hanafi scholar in history would say that you should combine behind those Imams. Don't cause an inconvenience to your group. Don't make it hard on yourself, and don't make it hard on everybody else. You take the opinion then of Abu Yusuf and Al-Shaybani, As-Sahibain, who had the opinion of Al-Jama', who actually permitted combining the prayers, or permitted praying Asr at an earlier time, for example. All right? So if you're in a place, you know, subhanAllah, I've met people that in Hajj and Umrah will not pray Asr in the Haram because they say it's not Hanafi Asr. I'm like, Allahu Akbar, are you really that blind? Like that you're going to miss Salah in the Haram because they're not praying Salah at the Hanafi time? Imam Abu Hanifa would smack you in the face. Say, what's wrong with you? Go pray in the Haram, right? But that's how hardcore it becomes. So following the point that I'm going to make here, and this is also, by the way, from Ibn Abidin in his Hashiyah, he says, following the established opinion in another madhab in a case of need is permissible. When there's a hardship that's presented to you on an individual level or when you're with a group, all right? So I know that this is going to get me in all types of trouble, but the issue of masah, for example, all right? If the issue of masah in your madhab is not permitted, but you're in a position where it's going to pose a serious hardship to you to not do masah, to not wipe, then it is permissible for you to wipe because it's an established opinion in another madhab. When there's an established opinion in another madhab, use that as a makhraj. Ibn Abidin says, so that way you are still within the scope of the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Because if you lift that, then a person will say, you know, either they'll die trying to follow their madhab and they'll ruin it for themselves and ruin it for everyone else, or they'll end up doing something that's outside of the scope of the sunnah. He said, instead, find another established opinion that can suit you in that situation. It doesn't mean that you're permanently switching your opinion here. It means that you're in a situation, so you're going to follow the established opinion in another madhab to make that situation easier for you. All right, so that's permissible, as Ibn Abidin mentions in his Hashiyah. And then finally, it's not impermissible that if you find evidence to be more compelling on a certain issue here or there, that you would follow that evidence, as long as you don't become arrogant about it. Okay? And it's also fine, and this is really the way that we summarize it all, if a person chooses to do absolute taqleed. Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah summarized the entire discussion, by the way, on taqleed and ijtihad. He said, and the conclusion of this all is that taqleed is absolutely permissible and ijtihad is absolutely permissible. If a person chooses to bound themselves by all of the opinions of one scholar that's from Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, they are not going to be atham, they will not be sinful. And if a person chooses to do so for the most part, but then to, if compelling evidence comes on an issue, to follow that compelling evidence, they're not going to be held accountable for that. They will not be sinful. And a person, obviously we shouldn't divide the ummah on the basis of these things. That wasn't the point of these methodologies. These were approaches to the sunnah. They are all within the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Abu al-Wafa ibn Aqil, who is one of the most staunch Hanbalis in history, Abu al-Wafa ibn Aqil, Some scholars came to him from an area that was predominant, or some students, I'm sorry, came to him from an area that was predominantly Shafi'i. And they told him, we want to study with you. And he said, why are you coming to study with me? He said, go study the madhab of your people. They said, why? We're here to study with you. He said, no, because I'm afraid you're going to take the madhab of Ahmad and you're going to go force it upon your people and you're going to make them hate Ahmad and then even hate the Prophet ﷺ. Don't do that. Follow a valid approach that's not going to divide your community at the end of the day. And the madhab of the Imam who's leading the salah by all schools of thought is the madhab of the people. The madhab of the Imam who's leading salah is the madhab of the people. That's what Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala says as well. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to show us to the truth. Allahumma arina al-haqqa haqqa warzuqna tiba'a wa arina al-batila batila warzuqna ijtinaba. I hope inshallah ta'ala that was a good summary of everything, how to approach hadith, how to approach madhab and fiqh and these types of things. I hope you guys are still Hanbalis hopefully, but I'm just playing.